What's up, listeners? Welcome back to Predator vs. Movies. I'm Alex.
I'm Aidan. No goddamn
No
Peter once again.
This
Peter, if you're listening
second
to
week
this,
in a row.
get the fuck over here, man. What the goddamn hell are you doing?
This is, I think, third week in a row. Maybe that he's not been here, but one he was here. Maybe last
Very
week he
briefly.
was here and then gone.
Yes, that was for Killers, yeah.
But anyways, I bet you're wondering what this is. This is a podcast, shocker, where we discuss and review the latest movie releases. We're going to start off with a non-spoiler review before diving into a deeper discussion of the film, and then we shall ask the most important question: would this movie be better if the alien from Predator was in it? This week we will be reviewing Anatomy of a Fall. But before we do so, we have some news. I just heard this today, but David Fincher is actively considering The Social Network 2.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I remember I've heard for a long time, I don't know where the source of this is or if it's even legitimate information, but I remember hearing for a long time that he was willing to do this for like years and was just, I think the quote was like, only if Aaron Sorkin returns to do the script or like what, it was something like that. So from what I understand, this is not out of nowhere.
Okay. So I just checked the tweet again. It just says there's been talks, which is my favorite vague.
Yeah.
Someone else was really vague this week too. It was Ryan Johnson, who was like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about writing Knives Out 3, and I think I've got a location maybe." It's just like,
it's funny because it's just like I assumed that you were thinking about Knives Out 3. I think everyone thought there was going to be a third one, so that's not really information at all.
It's just kind of like an interviewer asks you a question, but you don't really have an answer. So
yeah.
What is The Social Network 2? Is it them buying Instagram?
I feel like there's actually like a lot of things you could do, like just the way Zuckerberg is spiraled, like just what's everything that's happened with Facebook since. Like, I don't know. I mean, here in Canada, there's the whole news, the Bill C-47 is a film thing. Oh my god, that's embarrassing. No, it's like C-18 or whatever. I forgot the exact number, but there's the Facebook news kerfuffle here. I doubt it would be about that. My point being that there's tons of things that have happened. I feel like I would actually wonder, like, what specifically are they going to focus on? Or maybe is it going to jump a bunch of time periods?
I remember he was like in front of Congress or something that one time a while ago. So like maybe that would be something. I don't know. What I really liked about The Social Network was it was like an analysis of him and like how social networks really like how people are friends with each other and I like kind of like the small scale of that.
Yeah.
A little bit of concern that like you might inevitably have to get into like the politics of what Facebook has become, and that's a very different beast. I think with David Fincher, like I think he would be able to pull anything off basically. So like if he wants to do a politics Facebook movie, like I'll be there. I'll be there opening weekend. You know.
From the impression I get from David Fincher movies though is that that's just not what even interests him necessarily. And I think that like, and I don't know. I feel like from things I've seen him say, I don't know how I'd feel about him doing that either. I don't know if he's equipped for something super political, but I mean I don't really know at the end of the day. But no, I agree that like I like that about The Social Network, that it's this very isolated. It's just about this guy who is like a loser and got dumped, and that's portrayed as the whole point of the whole thing. Is just he got dumped and that made him feel bad. And that's like the entire, and he never wanted to feel like a loser, and like that's
it's a character study. It's a character study instead of like a study of society writ large. Yeah. Speaking of character studies,
but Social Network is my favorite David Fincher movie. I will say
it's so good. Yeah. I agree. It's very very good. But speaking of character studies, this isn't really a character study. But speaking of movies. Really. We watched.
Speaking of movies, yeah.
Aidan, do you want to tell us what it is?
Yeah, we watched a little movie called Anatomie of a Fall. It's from France.
He's typing it into his computer right now.
It is a French film. It came out this year. You already, yep. Yeah. So in French, that's Anatomie d'une chute.
Chute, yeah.
Chute, yeah. Is tomber not the verb to fall, or is it? I don't speak French. I don't know.
Well, tombe is the verb to fall, but I'm not going to say that shoot is wrong.
Right. I'm not
Chute might be
saying
the
the
noun
French people
version.
are incorrect about their French. Okay, but anyway, it's directed by Justine Triet. It's written by her as well. Also, Arthur Herrier. I'm gonna say every name. No, never mind. Never mind.
And you're going to have a long pause afterwards where you're like, try not to laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Starring,
See?
starring Sandra Hüller.
She's German, actually.
She is German, but it's a French movie, so everyone's name is French. Okay, I'm gonna stop doing this though. Swan Arlaud, a bunch of other people as well. Cinematography is Simon Beaufy. I actually think that is probably how you say that. I was just doing the thing. It premiered initially in France on May 21st, in Cannes rather, in Cannes, sorry. And then it released on the 23rd of August. It's in France, it's a wide release. Just came here very recently. Runtime is 152 minutes. Budget was 6.2 million euros, I believe. But then the box office is in dollars, which is 10.4 million. So I don't
Euros
know.
Are there dollars?
Are there dollars?
Yeah. You kind of breezed over this, but I mean, it was at Cannes. Did it do anything
Oh,
else?
it did win the
interesting
Palme
there?
d'Or. Yeah,
Kind
it did
of a
win the
big
Palme d'Or.
deal.
Right, it did say that. The problem is it doesn't just. The problem is it doesn't explicitly say that on the
Yeah.
Wikipedia box that I read. So
Yeah.
if it's not there, I don't know it.
It doesn't. It did happen.
Yeah, it did happen.
But yeah, it did win the Palme d'Or. Fun information background. It was not selected by France to represent France in the international category at the Academy Awards. So
Oh,
it
really?
will not win Best International Film because it was not. What in the motherfucking? What is that? You see that?
Yeah. For
I
audio
just-
listeners, let's explain it. For audio listeners, we record this on Discord, and every now and then, this like thumbs up emoji will just flash in front of Alex's
like a
face.
thought bubble. A thought
Yeah,
bubble.
and we don't know we don't know where that's coming from. So if anyone is listening and knows what that is, please help, because it's
help.
really funny.
And this has happened only once before.
No,
And
I've seen it
only
like 2 or 3 times.
two or
It's
three
just very
times.
brief.
Okay, I've only seen it one time, and it was. I feel every single time it happens, Peter is not here, so
Yeah,
we only
yeah.
have just the two of us, and like the one who really knows Discord.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it won the Palme d'Or, but because so this is the interesting thing. So a different film called Pot au Feu, I believe, it has been chosen to represent France, and people are thinking the reason might be because Justine, I forget what her last name is.
Triet or
the
Triet.
dir-
I don't know how you say it.
Triet,
Actually, I don't know how you say it.
the director, is had some said some things about President Macron of France,
Oh, right.
and so they think it's a backlash thing. Like he's kind of pissed off, and so
Why is
he
he
won't.
involved in choosing the film? That
one of
feels
those
the-
well, it's a government thing, you know. Like
right, which just
deciding
just
who-
just the
so just,
influence he
Yeah.
wields. Sure.
Yeah, and he, I don't really know the ins and outs of French politics, but I've heard not great things about President Macron generally, so not exactly surprising. It is Trier. So I won't do that, but I think it can still be nominated for anything else. Like remember, what's that movie called? All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah.
Not an American film, got best cinematography or something, and best sound design maybe.
And which was insane. It
so-
got the best score, which was
Lot of
fucking
awards,
crazy.
yeah.
That best score is insane for that movie.
So yeah, Anatomy of a Fall could appear somewhere else in the competition, but and then the other thing, more information. I looked up what Chute is, and it is action de tombe. Action de tombe is the French definition.
okay.
So it's how we use it. It's
Sure.
a fall. It's the noun version.
Right,
essentially.
I understand.
But now we play. Now that Aidan has given me some information on this film, we play
Yes.
a game called Predacritic. This game, there is a website called Metacritic where scores of a movie are. They just exist there.
Yeah.
Don't know how I got there. And we're going to guess what the score of this movie is, assuming it's on there. And I've spun the wheel, and I am going first. It would be actually kind of funny if we did this foreign film, and it's just like, I don't know what that is. I think it knows
It probably is there.
Films.
I don't think we've ever had it. We've done some fairly niche films, and I don't think there's ever been one that straight up isn't there. So,
No. So yeah, I did get landed on first, so I will guess first. I'm gonna go with 90.
90.
That's how I feel. Yeah, it might be too high, but I don't know.
I do feel like it's around there, but I think there's a chance it's slightly lower.
It's the problem with there's only two people.
There's only two people. I will go 89.
Okay, let's find out.
We'll see. Oh, no.
Okay, I probably shot too high, so it is in fact an 87.
Okay.
So I'm not surprised. So that's a must-see label. The website likes it. We don't know how that score got there, so it must be the website. Anyways, so seeing as you guessed correctly, Aidan, you do get to deliver your non-spoiler reaction. Premier.
That
means
nice.
First.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a very good movie. Alex and I saw this one together, so the old osmosis of the past might occur once again. This is a very well made movie. I think the directing is very superb. It is a well movie. It has well cinematography. It has well acting. I very much enjoy this movie. The slight critiques I can offer is that I think there are certain moments where it's perhaps a little bit too precious about its moments, and I can talk about that a bit more. And then I also do think that sometimes the writing is like, okay, I do understand the point you're making. I don't necessarily need a full scene where it's a little explicit sometimes, and I think sometimes it loses I don't know if I don't think it never loses the sense of character and emotional grounding, but sometimes that it like just distracts from it a little bit, and because it gets it's very concerned with its more intellectual or heady ideas, I think. And I think like those are my only real criticisms, though. I think other than that, this was a superb, very, very well made movie. Definitely one of my favorites of the year. Very interesting exploration of themes and subjectivity and facts and how that intersects with our biases. I would give this a 4.5 and recommend it to people.
Yeah, so I think this is an amazing movie. This might be my favorite movie of the year so far. Currently on my ranking, I have Oppenheimer first. I don't know if that's even still true for me, but I mean, Anatomy of a Fall might take number one anyways. This was the kind of movie that, like, I noticed while I was watching, like, my eyes were, like, glued to the screen and, like, I had my complete undivided attention. And also one that, like, once it was over, I didn't want to, like, get up. I think we sat through the entire credits because we were just, like, so I don't know, stunned or like just like not wanting to like end the experience of such a great movie. I liked how like deep and thoughtful it was. Maybe I don't know, maybe it gets a little bit too wrapped up in its ideas, but I like that it had ideas and it they were kind of like for the most part clear and represented with like a little bit of subtlety. Like a lot of it was in. I don't think it's super
I think this movie has a lot of subtlety. I agree. I think there's a lot of nuance to this movie. I just think there are times where it just gets a little consumed with itself.
Yeah, that's fair. And what else could I say? Superb acting, superb, not just superb directing and cinematography. The thing I kept saying to myself in my head while I was watching it, I was just remarking that like this is just such a rich text that you can like go back and watch this movie and pick out like new elements to it, which is just kind of like that's just like my favorite thing with movies is when it's like a puzzle, and there's like you're just trying to like figure it out, and all the different like clues and pieces to it. It's also like sometimes it's a little funny. I'm not sure if it was intended to be funny, but we were laughing. There were parts that made me scared, parts that made me like sad. So like it did everything, and yeah, I really liked it. So I could give it a modest 4.5. I don't know. That could shoot up to a 5, but I kind of want to watch it again to like get my like full thoughts on it. But I really really like this, and so yeah, I would 100% recommend people go check this one out. But because I did lose, does mean I have to summarize this one. By the way, it was 2.5 hours, and that went by like nothing.
That went by so quickly. And I had a thing where I mistook what movie we were watching like right before I went to go see it, and I thought that it was Zone of Interest. And so I looked up the Zone of Interest running time, which is like an hour 45 or something. And so I went into this movie still with that in mind, and I walked out of it being like, yeah, that was probably about an hour 45. And then I was crazy. Like, oh no. No, it wasn't. Yeah.
Similar thing happened to me with Banshees last year. I had the wrong runtime in my head. I was like, this is taking forever. But funny thing about Zone of Interest, also starring Sandra Hüller. She was in some of the 2 most acclaimed films from Europe.
That's probably why I confused it so hard.
Yeah. But before I do summarize this, I do need a spoiler warning for those who've not seen this.
Wee woo, wee woo.
That's
a spoiler warning for new listeners.
I am going to try my best to summarize this movie in French.
I feel like you can, completely in French, yes.
No. There's a lot of English in this movie.
There's a lot of English in the movie. Yeah.
So actually, I was saying to other people, like, quite accessible for Canadian American audiences. Anyways, I've got my timer in front of me, and I will start shortly. I'll start now. So there's a couple who live in France, and it's and they have a young son who's I think like legally blind, but maybe not fully blind. And she's getting interviewed by a reporter. They're both writers. She's a writer and a professor, and maybe he's also that, but he doesn't write a lot because he's been focused on the kid. And he starts blasting an instrumental version of 50 Cent's PIMP to piss her off and to make the interview go away. The kid goes on a walk. He comes back. The dad is dead. And the question is, was he killed by the wife, or was it a suicide? And the rest of the movie is essentially a court case where they're trying to figure that out. And she's kind of like interested in her lawyer.
There's a prosecutor who is very
kind of mean, kind of aggressive, kind of aggro. There's
eventually the son.
There's a person who has to like look after the son to make sure he's not being witness tampered by the mom. The son wants her to go away for a weekend so that he can poison the dog to see if that's possible. The wife slowly reveals stuff like they had a fight the day before that he recorded. The husband much aspirin to kill himself, and I think it becomes a little more clear that the suicide angle is likely. It's likelier than maybe initially believed. The son eventually decides that this is the case, and so he gives his thoughts on it, and then she's acquitted, and everything's happy. That's a hard movie to summarize. It's so much.
It's because it's like the plot moves very well, but it also like there are no big like actions to grab onto. It's like, okay, they were in court and they debated it, and then they were in court some more, they debated it more. And
this guy showed up. He had a model. And then another person with a different model showed up, and they disagreed on some things. And it's a lot of that. But it's good. It's good. It's just hard to describe. First question, favorite part.
Favorite part.
I didn't even think about this.
I can give you one right off the dome. This one's hard to choose because I think overall I just really love one of the moment I'm choosing here is I'm choosing it because I think it's emblematic of the visual direction that I think is really strong in this movie. So this movie spends a lot of time in kind of these somewhat voyeuristic shots, particularly in conversation.
Yeah.
Like it's you're kind of distanced from them. We're often not in the conversation. Like we're not like really in the axis there, and when we are, it's very dirty and it's like a long lens. But then there are certain times where the movie establishes a visual style and then switches it up for very particular moments, and you can tell it's very intentional. So there's a moment when this is when we're listening to the recording that she didn't know the husband had made about the fight, and it's kind of like a low point in the argument that they're having because we see like a version of what happened of the argument. We don't just hear it playing in court. And there's a moment where she comes over to him and she's like, "I love you," and it's like a very quiet, like tender moment, and I love that it cuts away from their faces. And it's just this very kind of ethereal insert of like their hands. And it's a very, very close long lens thing. And I think given what this movie is saying, or what I think it's saying about information and how we experience the world, how we understand things, I think the fact that we are cut off from their faces there, it almost is the idea that pit of information, that moment in the argument is ignored in the broader scheme of what's being played in the court. That is, even though it's very important, it's actually a very, very important moment. It gives a lot of information. It's almost not, we're not privy to it in the same way because that's, in this context, not the type of information that's getting privileged. But then I also just think it's it gives this very quiet, intimate feeling to a very quiet, intimate moment, and it emphasizes it really well. So that's why I think it's an example of really good multi-layered visual directing.
Yeah, no, and I think that really gets at the heart of what the movie's trying to discuss is like what evidence is like allowed. It's like the proof of burden or the burden of proof.
Burden
like
proof.
what type of evidence is there's a word for it, but I can't remember what it is. Like how some evidence just like is obtained or like is ignored because it's not proper evidence, like it's not written, it's not a recording or whatever. So like a lot of the evidence they do have is kind of like I don't know if it's circumstantial, but like it
they have to bring experts in.
Yeah.
And they have to bring people. Yeah.
It's a very thin like picture of what the whole truth is, and it kind of, they discount a whole world of information, that the things that are unspoken, unrecorded, that all those things that would corroborate what she's saying just aren't like even considered because they're not these hard facts.
Because we tend to bestow a certain amount of authority on documentation, but the reality is like we live most of our lives undocumented, and I think that the movie's making a good point about that. But
yeah. For my favorite part, I'll just have one for like another thing of like visual direction. There's a part where I don't think it's even the first day of court, but like it's a scene where we're kind of like taking notice of who's in the audience portion of it. I don't know what you call that section, but like the people who are just watching, they're not in the jury, they're just watching. And it scans the crowd, and it's like a lot of women are there. You see like all the women who are in the crowd, and there's one man there, and he's a black man, and the rest of the crowd are women, and I think mostly white women. And then there's a point where the prosecutor is giving a speech or something, talking about whatever, and as he's delivering this kind of like damning thing against the main character, whose name is Sandra, he looks at the audience, and he looks directly at the only man in the audience, and they kind of like nod at each other. He's like yeah, and the guy like nods at him, and he's like yeah, and it's so like that's another thing of like this visual direction that says it all. It's um this like he's ignoring all of the women in the room and is kind of like this secret world of men, and kind of like they're the ones who get it, right? And so he's like, you get it, right? The only guy in the audience, and yeah, so yeah, that's a scene that I really liked, or a moment that I was like, oh, that's a really clever, like subtle, very subtle thing that again speaks to like the whole point of the movie, and I feel like the movie's just full of those kind of moments.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say what I like about that moment, and broadly about some of the points that this movie is making. I think particularly in regards to like what we were talking about, privileging of information, and how that intersects with societal biases such as sexism that exist. So like anytime a piece of information is delivered, anytime a story is told and a narrative is spun, it like automatically grafts itself and attaches itself to pre-existing biases, and the pre-existing biases we have influence the way we receive it. And there are other examples of that as well, but I don't remember exactly what I was thinking, like, but it is this idea of like he is very much leaning on sexist narratives that he knows exists, and he's doing it very intentionally despite displaying it with an air of objectivity, and it conceals his biases because he, within the context of the court and as a prosecutor, is, and relying on documented whatever and splatter analysis and whatever, is presenting it as if that's not a part of it at all when it very clearly is, and everyone kind of understands that it is, but no one in this context can say it because it's not an observable fact.
It's systemic, and it's really hard to like address things like that. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll say one that maybe is what you're talking about. An example is when they start talking about the affairs she's had. And so there's this preconceived notion about like relationship dynamics, and in addition to, in kind of very much related to gender dynamics. And when they say, you know, they bring this up as part of like why they're trying to basically accuse that she killed him. And so they start bringing up her affairs, the fact that she was seeing other people. And she says quite clearly, like, a lot of them were, like, known to him. He knew. He was aware. And they were, I think they weren't flings. She said a different word maybe. Or maybe it was flings, I don't know. But it was just kind of like small things. And they kind of, like, completely disregard that fact, the idea that maybe it was consensual in some way, and you know, then later there was an affair that he wasn't aware of, and this idea that like that these kind of things have to be, I don't know, like it kind of brings like two questions to mind, like how is this relevant, I guess, to the case that's like it's trying to like kind of like tearing down her character, based on these ideas society is imposing on her. So like in a murder trial, which this isn't, I don't know if that really is, but she's being like not like charged or I don't know. So how is that relevant? And the second question is like what is like cheating or, you know, adultery even mean in like why it's so crazy, like it kind of brings these questions to mind, like what does that even mean? What is cheating even? And it kind of almost like it made me wonder, like, is that just like something imposed by men to have control? It's another device of control that you know, of ownership of women, and so that those kind of questions were coming to my mind, and it's a very like, again, even like thinking in like more broadly, I guess, that is not how all relationships work these days. Like it's a very narrow-minded view. You know, we have polyamory, now, and open relationships. There are other ways that people live their lives these days, and so it's kind of discounting those ideas. And yeah, I don't know. That was one thing that I thought maybe had to do with what you're saying.
Yeah, I thought of the moment I was thinking of too. It's a moment where the prosecutor specifically uses the word castrated in describing how the men felt, and like that's a very specific word choice. That's very intentional. But I want to talk about the cheating thing as well, because I think something that I think this movie does, which is very interesting, is that for me at least, I think you are very clearly on the side of Sandra, the main character, for at least the first half of the movie. You're like, yeah, like clearly she's being mistreated. Clearly they are presenting a very narrow view of what's happening. Clearly they're ignoring a lot. And then I actually think that it's intentionally getting you to question her. And I think I have a point that I think it's testing the audience based on what are they going to project onto what we're seeing here. So we are missing, like the prosecutor, like the court, we are missing so much of the context of what this relationship is. And so based off what we're seeing, we are making assumptions based off our own experiences and our own biases. And so I think what's really interesting is that, like, from my perspective, it does seem like cheating is a breach of contract, right? It's a breach of, their argument has this air of neither of them thinks they've done anything wrong because they're both standing by their own definitions of what is wrong, and they've both decided things. They've both presented things in the same way. They've chosen to believe things a certain way. And so, like, I think that's talking about the malleability of fact here, and how fact is not something that's set in stone. And to loop it, that's a bit of a tangent. To loop it back to what I was originally getting to is, like, are you going to see that it does seem like she probably did cheat on him. It seems like he didn't want that to happen, right? And if that is, you know, like in a relationship, if both parties are not okay with, like, being with other people, that is cheating. But, like, what I think is really interesting is I think it's testing the audience about, are you going to then immediately turn on her? Like, are you going to start using maybe things that have hurt you, things that, you know, your own experiences, and again, like, prejudices that exist that have been incepted into you, is that going to sway you, and is that going to change how you feel about this? And it's calling into question, how do you know these things?
And it's, I think another thing that that they use against her is, like, these patriarchal ideas of what women are allowed to be. And I think that's a big part of it, is, like, the fact that she's cheating, or that she had cheated, is, like, that's a marker that says something about you, and it has certain connotations, and it's slowly chipping away at her character, even though these things kind of, like, again, are not the same kind of, like, objectively evil things like killing someone. Right. And so she did that. Another thing that I think in my understanding, they are using as, like, something to, like, attack her character, is they mention that she is bisexual, and I feel like they only bring that up to demonize her as, like,
they bring it up, like, as if to suggest that she's some kind of, like, floozy who's meeting every young girl and young college student, and
which is why I think the cheating thing is brought up too. So she's bisexual, which means, you know, in the eyes of the court, she could be sleeping with everyone, you know, boys and girls, and there is kind of a connotation of, like, people who are bisexual, because they're not limited to one gender, that they are more sexually active, and then they use that against her again for the interviewer from the beginning of the film, when she has to appear in court because she has recording, and they kind of put these pieces together, and they say, were you flirting with this woman? And she says no, and I guess it's the film smartly puts you kind of, like, in the deciding seat, and, like, what did you think? I don't know. Like, it's kind of, like, up to your own interpretation. The interviewer, I think, also denies, both Sandra and the interviewer deny that it was flirtatious, but because they've built up this kind of these like attacks on her reputation and what they deem kind of like demonizing characteristics. They're using this against her again for a murder trial, something that is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think touching on what you're talking about as well, about like a lot of our like this, I think this movie is deconstructing how we believe in things and why we believe in things, and I think it says this like explicitly later when the boy is talking to the court appointed person who was watching after him. I forget what the title is, but and he has to basically decide, because he's been through this whole trial and it's dragged on. He has to decide, does he think his mom killed his dad or not?
Mm-hmm.
And she tells him, like, you ultimately just have to choose what to believe. Like, there is it is just faith at a certain point. Like, and I like that idea. That's a really interesting idea, that it is just, even in this very sort of secular and seemingly objective realm where we're talking about facts and we're talking about splatter analysis and what have you, and all these models that have this air of scientific objectivity, there is still a certain matter of just faith in what feels right and what things happen. And there's like a naturalization process of those beliefs that occurs in our minds, where they get to a point where they feel natural and they feel objective, and like they've always been true.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great beat of this story, as it's like a convergence of the two themes. Yeah. So it's, like you said, this whole notion of, well, we've only got these kind of like a few cold hard facts, evidence of like the splatter analysis. Like you said, there's blood splatter on the shed. They have the recording of the interview. They have the recording from the fight before, and they're just trying to construct a narrative off of these things that do not strongly indicate one way or another what happened. And so, like you said, he has to choose, and I want to talk more about that later, but just kind of keeping it a little bit with the point we started with, it's the reason I called it a convergence points of the themes is that it's ultimately this movie is men deciding what they think this woman did.
To be clear though, the judge is a woman, and I don't think that subtracts from a point about overall sexism. But I think, because it is still, that's still the world they're in. But
but also the judge is not the person who decides. It is this is a trial with a jury. But
the jury also many women.
Not all men. Yeah. But what I just mean by this is that what I like so much is that like a lot like kind of like the whole thing, because both sides have come up with equally viable. I don't know if they're exactly equal. I believed one more than the other, certainly, but you know, there's a case for why she might have done it or why she might have not have, and they're like, you know, they both can account for the splatter analysis in different ways. I think so much of the ultimate decision relies on what the son thinks, and I think that's quite smart of the movie. Is like, and also like from how they decide to frame everything. The film departs Sandra's perspective for a while, and we stick with the son for like 10 minutes or something. It's quite interesting. It was almost like this Psycho kind of thing, but the bubble is real.
The thumbs up bubble is bad.
Do you think Discord is like agreeing with it? Do you think it's like
it's Craig?
Yes, what you're saying is right.
It's Craig being like, yep. Yeah.
So this is crazy. So it departs her perspective, and like I said, it comes down to the boy who is 10 or something, and it's like kind of like his decision. I like that in this scene he's wearing red, which I've kind of decided is like the color of the patriarchy. It's what the prosecutor is wearing. It's what the judge is wearing. So either it could just be the idea of like law of justice is the color of red, but it kind of has that masculine, that violent undertone. There's like red has like the connotations of anger in our culture. And so I like that it ultimately comes down to him. And there's a great shot when she eventually comes home and she hugs him, and the way that is framed is from his perspective again. It is like she's out of focus, he is in focus, and he is petting her, and his head is kind of on top, and he kisses her forehead, and it's kind of like all is amended because the men, and including this young boy, have like deemed it so, and he forgives her, and that's kind of what ends this whole thing is his forgiveness. It feels very much like the men are in control, and I don't know. It seems like maybe you're not sure on
that's
that. But like that's
no,
what I picked up on.
Well, yeah, that's not how I was reading it, to be honest. Not saying you're wrong, but that's not what I was thinking. What I think is interesting about the whole son thing, because I agree that it's very interesting that that the ending is up to a certain point, pretty much from his perspective. I think that like what happens is that he is able to just tell a story that is viable enough and fits well enough with people's expectations that it pushes over the edge. Like there's a moment that I love when ultimately the reason that the boy decides that his mom did not kill his dad, because to be clear, like as a side point, I don't think the movie's not demonizing the boy. Like it's fair that the boy would be struggling with this. It's fair that the boy might think this and might go along with this. But there's a moment where the boy recalls a conversation he had with his dad in the car, and the dad is basically saying like, you have to prepare yourself for when your dog is going to be dead, because he's probably going to be dead soon and he's not going to be around. And he's really insisting that like the dog is going to be dead soon. And the boy essentially in court, he says, I now understand that he was actually talking about himself. And to me, that was just like, I didn't see that as a moment of control and patriarchy. I just saw it as a moment as like, he just told the right story. And it was a story that just had enough for people to grab onto that they believed the entire narrative. It was the right piece that locked into it. That's what I thought was really interesting about it. That it was, as much as we try and pretend like the way we in our personal lives come up with things is based on fact, but also extending that to a court system that is supposedly built on objective fact, as much as we say that, like he understood people speak in idiom, people speak in metaphor. We don't necessarily explain, express, or receive the world in objective terms. And so I think it's really interesting that I saw it as a point about being the final data point that pushes it over the edge is just this kind of idiomatic understanding of what the dad was saying there.
Yeah, I think that scene is so good because, like you're saying, it's the final piece of this puzzle. This whole court thing is like coming up with stories based on what we know, and I feel like even that is kind of like a story based upon stories that is kind of like twice removed. And what occurred to me later is like the whole, like, we don't know if that conversation really happened, and I would go as far to say as it probably didn't.
There's a chance it did, yeah.
Because the conversation he has with the court lady is like you said, you have to decide what you think is true, and she almost like tells him to lie, like kind of like in not so many words, but and I love that when he's giving his testimony, he like basically quotes her. He says kind of he repeats what she had said to him before he recounts the story. And the way that story is depicted is we see the dad talking in like a sort of flashback. It's filmed very close, and so like kind of like it feels like you don't really know where we are. It
feels like a very subjective experience of what's happening. Yeah.
It's not only subjective, but just like it's limited. The world is not there. It's more
as if he doesn't have the full memory. He just has this. Yeah.
Or as if it's a fabrication, and it's like kind of like a vague like idea of like we're in a car and there's something passing behind us.
Yeah.
And the key point of this is this is delivered in his narration, and the dad mouths the words in sync to what he's saying. It's like the son is putting the words in his dad's mouth because the dad never said them. This is all made up. It's the boy's own words. And so I thought that was really smart, kind of like, again, hinting at what that scene really is, but without ever having to explicitly say it.
Yeah.
I feel generally this movie treats its audience very well. It assumes they are smart and they are paying attention, which are the best kinds of movies.
Yes, and I do just one more thing about that little moment. I think that just kind of to wrap up a lot of what I've been saying too, I think that that scene is calling into question. It is examining the fallible nature of memory, and I think that considering the context of the rest of the movie, it's also considering documentation to be a fallible source of information as well, because it also, well, it seems to have this air of it's locked in time and it's untouched by subjectivity and whatever. It's still there's still so much context, and it's still just a snapshot, and the way it's presented and the way it's wheeled and the way it's attached to authority, it makes it not necessarily as objective as one might say.
I think a great example of that is when they bring in the dad's therapist, and
Yeah.
they treat that like that is some sort of
'Cause he has
concrete
authority.
evidence.
Yeah.
Because he has some amount of authority, male authority, he is a male therapist, and it's all it is how a guy was feeling, and then even that is not fully true, because any interaction you have, you are only giving a small piece of the truth. You're leaving information out. So what he is saying to his therapist might not have even been objective truth. There was already a filtering going on where he's saying how he's feeling, and so if he's feeling emasculated, which is kind of what the film is implying, he might not say that. Instead, he might say things that is describing the feeling, but without the knowledge of the greater thing that is causing it. He's just seeing kind of like the end effects, the results of this greater feeling. So, he can't recognize that he's emasculated. Instead, he'll say, my wife's being a bitch. I don't think that was something the therapist said, but that is an example.
Right.
So, and then the therapist recounts in court, yeah, he said his wife was being a bitch. I think she killed him. Like, that doesn't mean anything. That's not evidence. And then also I like that, like, how it's not only what the dad was saying to the therapist is filtered, there's another filtering going on in the therapist receiving that information and deciding what is important about what he's saying. He's adding meaning to it. He's trying to figure out how this guy was feeling based on what he thinks about what the guy chose to say.
Yeah.
So there's so much filtering going on, and yet the court is treating it like it is some objective truth, when that is simply not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to move on to something that is related, but is still, I can kind of go into both my criticism and a strength of this movie that I really, really like. And so we've been talking a lot about a lot of heady sort of ideas about like truth and fact. One of my critiques of this movie, there are times where it's like, okay, I do understand the point you're making, and we are just talking about this. I think that there's some amount of intentionality to this. Like, it's pointing to the fact that we have these very long discussions, that it's so important to us to be able to explain things, that it's emphasizing the discussion aspect and the negotiation of truth. However, I do think that there's a little bit too much just talking about like, no, that's not true, but how could you do this? And there's a little bit like, so for example, there's a language thing. One of the ways that the truth is filtered and that information is filtered is that Sandra is not super fluent in French. She speaks it, but she's not great. And so she has to at first speak in French and deliver her story in French, which is immediately not fair, because languages order reality in different ways, and it's just a different understanding. It's harder to present it if you're not. Language is a tool, and it's hard to wield that tool if you're not super well used with it. But my critique is just that I think sometimes it like points to the fact that that's what it's doing too much. It's just like, okay, like you've brought it up like 3 or 4 times. I do get it, and it's like there's sometimes where I think the point is not quite different. It's like it is kind of the same point that was made earlier. But on the positive side, I don't think this is something that never brought down my experience of the movie. It was just something that I think that it would just be stronger if it wasn't quite like that. To talk about a strength, one of the things I really like is that while being very kind of heady and intellectual, it also manages to layer in ideas of innocence and love and like just this is a vague term, but like the human experience. So I really really like certain moments where it points to the fact that we understand the world in a multitude of ways, and it points that through like a very understated kind of thing. One of the things that I really really like, I think it's after like the first court day that we see, the boy and the mom are at home and they just play piano together, and
Mm-hmm.
that just resolves some of the tension. Like in that with like this idea of communication does not necessarily exist in these very like objective sort of terms. Like communication doesn't have to be, communication is something that is more implicit, it's connotative, and it's something that we understand intuitively, like, and it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to
It's
be
more than
overstated. So
words.
it's more than words. And what I like about that, I like that there are moments like that where they're playing piano together. There are other moments like that as well, like when they're just like hugging, and it's like that's clearly like everything that needs to be expressed is expressed here. And then there are also really silent moments where the characters are just looking at each other and they understand each other. There's a moment like that between the lawyer and Sandra towards the end. They're in a
Yeah.
sushi restaurant. And I do like that it layered that in as well, and I think that makes the movie quite strong.
Yeah. Oh man, what was I gonna say? I liked, yeah, with the language thing, how that keeps like coming to like to bite her. So she's originally from Germany, and so the common language that they both know is English. So neither of them are speaking their native language, and the dad is like mad at her about that. That she's forcing him to speak English, and he says we're on your territory when in fact they are living in France in his own town, and English is neither of their native languages. Yet he can't like accept that. So I like that, and then kind of like how, like you said, the translating thing, but it adds again that this idea of like, I guess it is like literally translation. Like
Yeah.
this, what I was calling filtering earlier, is translation of thoughts and feelings, and receiving those and hearing them and choosing what you think is important, and your word choice when you're translating is important, and um, so I found that all very interesting, as kind of like another like filtering device. Um, but I thought I was going to say something else about the language, but I'll mention the thing with the lawyer. That was an interesting thing of like, clearly there is some like romantic tension between her and
Mm.
her lawyer. There used to be something there, and that's kind of brought up at the beginning. And I think what I think ultimately maybe what the movie is trying to get at is like, they still have feelings for each other, and I almost feel like the reason why she pulls back is because like, again, this idea of what people will think about her. And
Mm.
I think that's another, we haven't even mentioned this, but like I think that's another, like, the maybe the third biggest theme of this movie is, it is not quite as important what actually happened than what people think of
Right.
you, and of, and in association with that, what happened. And that's mentioned quite explicitly early on by the lawyer. He says it doesn't matter what actually happened, it matters what people think happened. You have to create a compelling story
Yeah.
that they can believe, that is different than you killed him. It can't we can't just say, we can't just bring up plausible doubt that you didn't do it. And it's very funny that this is exactly what I just heard in an episode of American Vandal. They said the exact same. I'm watching that, and they said the exact same
Yeah.
thing for the guy who spray painted
Yeah.
dicks,
Yeah.
27 dicks on teachers' cars.
Yeah.
They said we can't just prove that you didn't do it, or there's like plausibility that maybe you didn't. We have to
Yeah.
find someone who's guilty. Actually,
Yeah.
we have to provide a different answer.
Yeah, that show's
So
awesome.
that's so funny. But yeah, anyway, so the point of what I was getting at is just that, um, again, with these ideas that like she's bisexual, she's had affairs, or all these things they're trying to use against her. We keep cutting to, and we haven't talked about this either. We keep cutting to other forms of media.
Mm.
A lot of them are like
Yeah.
reporters talking about events, and there's a talk show talking about Sandra, and so this idea of like what other people think about her is ever present in this film, and I think that's hanging over her in this scene, in that final scene in the restaurant with her lawyer. Um, she's kind of denying herself because what people will think, and there's this amazing cut and shot choice where they're looking at each other. She leans in, and we cut to outside the window to a voyeuristic perspective, as if we are the public watching her, scrutinizing her, and trying to make an opinion about her, and what are the optics of her actions. And I think she's very aware of what her actions could mean to people, and so in order to protect herself, she chooses not to kiss him. She just hugs him, which I think most people would be like, that's fine. You know, we're not gonna, you know, start saying terrible things about you just for a hug. So I found that scene quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's still within. Just to be clear, that's the scene where they're playing the audio recording in court, and we're seeing like the recording, right? Or am I thinking of a different? No, you're talking about the lawyer. Oh, you're talking about the lawyer at the restaurant, right? Oh, I do understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, and also talking a little bit about like what we think about her, and just talking again, just a little bit about like the scene I was talking about where they're kind of testing the audience in the fight thing. What again? Just to compare this to Fair Play, which is a movie that in some ways is tackling some similar ideas. I think that like this is an example of a movie that is much stronger again because it lets you, if not outright portraying her as doing something wrong or having some wrongful like some thoughts that we can kind of judge a little bit, it at the very least like lets that be a possibility. So it's like within that argument, like you're absolutely right that what he's saying about like you're imposing everything on me, that sounds generally like bullshit because of what's clearly going on. But there is also a point of like she does seem to not be listening to him and also not having any real empathy for him, and I think that that's a really interesting thing because again, it's like what I talk about in Fair Play is they clearly know each other very well, and so it feels like they can actually tear each other down, and like they're saying the worst thing. Like I think that like it does, and again, this is the testing the audience perception, but it does sound like she's not doing that much. Like she is expecting him to do a lot of the kid raising. It does sound like he is caught up, and at the very least, like she is so set in her definition of what things are that she can't even listen to that. And what I like about this movie is that it lets her be a somewhat questionable character, and it lets her say and do things that are not very good, and this is not a cowardly movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. Very, very much avoiding that kind of black and white distinction. And yeah, I think that scene in particular, the recording of their fight, does kind of like summarize the whole thing. Is like she does seem like she's not really putting in a lot. It seems like she is kind of like taking advantage of the fact that he has decided to be like the almost like homemaker person in the relationship. She's taking advantage of that. She does point to evidence like that says like he kind of put himself in this mess, but then it's like nothing is clear.
She has this very like individualistic. It seems like she has this very individual like, but you're a couple. Like it's like, well, that's your fault. Like that's your fault. But this is supposed to be a partnership. Like, and I think that tells you a lot about her character. And I think that's it's a really interesting character detail. And it's consistent that she's like that.
Yeah, and more on her character. I think it's like another interesting thing is like she seems like she's kind of like a detached mother. Like she's not been particularly close with her son, and she has reason for it. You know, he's been homeschooled by his father, and so he's kind of been like learning from his perspective. It doesn't seem like he's ever brainwashed him into like hating his mother, but like it does feel like he's been hearing from his perspective for so long, and he's been so close with him that compared to his mother, who is quite focused on her career and her work. They've never been as close, and so it's so interesting that, like, when they interact with each other, when they're doing the piano thing, there's that tension of, like, these are people who don't talk to each other that often.
Yeah.
They're people who don't really know each other super well. And I think also what kind of, like, again, this is it's fueling the idea of, like, the patriarchal view of what women are supposed to be and do. He is the homemaker in the relationship, and she is taking the male. They've switched.
It's a reversal of roles, and it feels
Yeah.
like a conversation we have seen in film and media, but with the other way around. Like, it feels like the layabout dad who never did care about nothing, and the mom who's stuck at home. But I agree with you.
But what's great is, like, they use that against her, right? It seems that, or at the very least, I don't remember if it's said in court, it's used for the audience. It's fuel for us to have against her, that we say, oh, well, she wasn't a good mother, therefore she's a bad person. It's just, again, these ideas of, like, what women can and can't be, shouldn't be, and it's, like, reflecting her morality. Meanwhile, the same standard would not be held against men, because those are what's expected.
Because if the dad was a similarly somewhat detached dad, that's accepted. That's what you expect the thing to be. That is the narrative that is always spun. And so it's a violation of what is natural, or what is considered natural.
And I think another good example of that is, like, when she wins the trial eventually. I have two examples of things where she does something kind of, like, bad. Again, things that, like, fair play would never allow for their characters. She wins the trial, and she calls her son, and she says, I'm coming right home. She doesn't. She goes to a restaurant and parties with her lawyer, who she's interested in, instead of going to see her son, who she wasn't able to see because of the court restrictions. And when she comes home, eventually, she's had a lot to drink, she's a little drunk maybe, and he's asleep because she's came home so late. And that's another thing we're, like, subtly supposed to, like, judge her on. We're kind of, like, the movie's asking us to judge her, and hopefully then question why we're judging her, or if we're being fair about that.
And I just think, like, what's interesting about it is that it's, again, this idea of, like, okay, well, just because she has a flaw, just because she's doing something, she seems a little maybe self-involved, like, that doesn't mean she's a bad person. You know what I mean? And just because maybe she's not the greatest mother, that doesn't mean she's a bad person. It's, like, the idea that, like, again, there's more nuance to the way we understand things and the way things are than how we always describe it. And so, like, those can both be true as well, that maybe, like, she could be a better mother. She seems to kind of, like, close in on herself when she's afraid a little bit. She even says to her son, like, I was afraid to come home. Like, I was afraid to come home and see you. And it's like, well, that is completely fair and very human. But at the same time, like, you are his mom, and you should probably go to your son at this point. You know what I mean? And but I agree with you that it's questioning, like, why are we judging her?
Yeah, and I like that, like, generally the whole court case quickly becomes less about whether or not she killed him, and more about, like, is she a good person? At least subliminally, subtextually, it's more about is she a good person than did she do it? And I think that's kind of, like, this whole, well, why that whole, like, patriarchy and these other questions we're asking is, like, because it's not about the facts. It's become about what people think about you. I'll say, like, another interesting thing that Sandra does that's bad is she talks to her son when she's not supposed to, without the court person there. I thought that was going to play more of a bigger... So I was a little surprised. I don't think it affects the film that it's not brought up again, because I think it's... Again, I think that's evidence for us, more so than it is for the court case itself. But that's another interesting thing, is she does break the rules, and she talks to him, and I think that seeds doubt in our minds as well as his. I think it's quite clear that it affects him, and he starts being more unsure of what his mom is saying.
Yeah, I also have a different direction that I think we can take this in for a second as well. In that I don't have, this isn't a very long point, but I do like, something I was thinking about is how like there's a brutalness to what's happening, and that these characters are being asked to trudge up hard memories and really and be so analytical and be so distanced from them as if that's even possible. And there's a good title card, and I think this is actually really important, that this trial's been going on for like a year or something, or it's like many months. Like this has been happening for a long time, and so like, and I think to me that manifests itself in, and I like this hyper mechanistic view of humans and human beings and what we do. And this, to me, like, this is one of the big reasons why the son tries to poison the dog, is because he needs to conduct an experiment to understand what's happening. His memories and these things that should be very emotionally resonant for him and should be sacred have been drudged up and analyzed and dissected and picked apart and put back together again so many times, that I think that the way I read that is, as a kid, as a malleable kid, he is understood. He has started to shift, like that's the only way he can understand reality, and so he almost kills his dog. And I think that that's very intentional. I think that, and also just side note, I was like, that was a stressful scene. I didn't want Snoop to die.
Right?
Yeah.
I think I looked at you and I was like, what are they doing? Kill a dog? That freaked me out. I was so sad. Again, another like just praise to the director. The child actor is phenomenal. The
he's very
acting
good.
is phenomenal.
Dog
just like good. I was just so in the moment when that happened, and I was like, please don't kill that dog.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just like, I wasn't thinking about it what you said, but that I completely agree. That idea that like as a younger person, he's kind of like reacting against what we have come across, like what we've realized is like that this trial is not about objective truths. It's about stories and translated truths, I guess. And he's reacting against that by doing something that is horrible, but at the very least objective, and actually also kind of like, I didn't even think about this, but like reflects what he's been seeing and hearing happening around him, because other people have been conducting these experiments, dropping like fake corpses.
Like the callous nature of seeing a doll that it represents your dad being thrown out of a window.
Recreating the argument and trying to hear when it happens. So he's doing what everybody else is doing, and it seems normal. You were gonna say something though.
I was just gonna say I think I can move away from more thematic elements in the movie, maybe not entirely, but just talk about some more film things, and that like performances are great. And so like we're talking about the kid, like I really love also like he seems like he's a very quiet kid with like a lot kind of going on beneath the surface that doesn't come out too much. And then towards the end, like when Snoop is dying and he's really like he's sobbing and he's trying to explain his feelings and it's all coming out, I was like, oh my god. And it's that idea of being clear and concise about when characters act to things and why they why they react to things in certain ways at certain times. And I think that comes down to really good performances, that comes down to good writing, and it comes down to really good directing too. But across the board, great performances. Like the Sandra actress is incredible.
And I think also it's interesting, just thinking about the kid, the Snoop scene is so much more heartbreaking than when he finds his dad. And I feel like that's so clever, like trying to do that big release of emotion for a character we did not spend a lot of time with. Neither of them. We don't know the dad at all. Actually, that's the first time we see the dad is when he's dead. And the son we've seen very, very little of. I think he just went for a walk. Like, I think it's smart to have that kind of be subdued, and that release of emotion, like over Snoop, I think is also related to like the grief of his dad. I don't think he properly or at least for us, and like we don't get to see the proper grief for his dad, and I feel like that's kind of like all combined, the guilt of all that maybe, and I'll lead that somewhere else. But first, I'll just say also Sandra Hüller, like you said,
Yeah.
so good. She's not even been acting for that long. I thought I knew her from something, and I looked her up, and I was surprised, like, oh, I don't know any of this. And one thing that I was gonna mention is like there's a scene where she's on trial and her like she starts twitching, and I noticed that, and I mean that's a thing you can't control, but I also think that just like I think that's acting, you know, like I think even though it's not like something you can control, it's getting to a place where you're feeling an emotion genuinely, and that genuine feeling of emotion brings on something like twitching, and I don't think it's an accident. I think she intentionally did something that got her there.
She's embodied the character so much that
that's great acting.
Another thing I really love about her performances is her little glances. She's always like looking over and like really furtively just kind of like at certain points like looking at certain people, because she's somewhat of a subdued character too. She's not super flagrant. She doesn't express everything super in a very explicit way necessarily, but I really like the little moments that indicate what she's thinking, where like I can't really think of a specific example, but it happens all the time in court where she'll maybe look towards her son very briefly. She'll look towards her, whatever. He'll look to the prosecutor, to the judge. And just like the little looks, I think it's just details like that make performance so good as well.
Yeah. What I was going to say, kind of in a different direction, but what like Snoop, the dog, this has nothing to do with performances. I think what the movie is trying to present, especially in that kind of like back half, is that Snoop is kind of like the representation of the dad, especially with that scene where the kid says essentially that the dad is the dog, and like there's like it's a metaphor, and there's the grief thing, but the final piece of that, so that's the first instance, the kind of like repetition of it, and the final version of that is the very final shot of the movie that is used for the credits, is after the trial, after she's, you know, her son has forgiven her or whatever, you know, she's in bed, and who comes to join her but Snoop, and they share their bed, and she's like petting him and kissing him or whatever, and I found that just so interesting, like knowing that like the dog is basically like represented the dad at this point, and I almost think it's like reconciliation, or like showing like she actually did love him, maybe. Like I think that's what maybe it's trying to say. I think it's a positive thing. Sure. Generally. Yeah. Did you have any thoughts about that ending?
I at that point, well, okay, I mean I can talk about another critique I have actually while we're just on the ending. But I do like that as well. I like that final shot. I think that sometimes this movie, like I said, is a little precious, and I think that is on display at the ending. I think this ending is too long. Like once the trial is ended, and we're just like, she's gone home, like she goes to the restaurant, and then she goes home, and then there's one scene in the living room, and then there's another scene with the son, and then like it's about to stop, but then she comes back and the scene keeps going, and there's a lot of like empty space in this scene. And then she goes to the bed, and then there's just a little bit too much, like, I just felt like there were multiple points where it seemed stronger to me to just end, or at least like shore it up a little bit, like just tighten it. And there are a few moments like that throughout the movie where I'm like, okay, I don't know that we needed to hang on this shot a little too. I don't know if we needed to hang on this shot this long. I don't know if we needed to have all this explained. Like it kind of ties into my other criticism. Yeah, and I just think particularly towards the end there are a lot of single shots that are held on. It's also a lot of like it's the thing that one of our film profs often criticizes a lot in films, where it's like character goes one place, cries, goes to another place, and then cries, and then goes to another place and then cries. Like there's a lot of her just being like I understand it's a very emotional time, but I just think like from a script writing perspective, it does feel like all of the individual moments are played as if they have the same importance and as if like they're the same level of emotional to her. And I that doesn't quite work for me. Like I just wish that these last final scenes were treated with some elevated above others, some just I feel like there's just a little too much sameness and preciousness at the end.
Okay, I definitely felt while watching it that I definitely thought it was going to end at a certain point, like quite closer to the end of the trial, and then I was like, oh, it's still going, and I wasn't sure how long it was going to continue, but I actually feel that I think all those scenes are completely justified. I like that the restaurant scene wraps up the story with the lawyer, and that it allows for that scene. Um, I think what's important to me is that life goes on after the trial. It's more than just the trial. The issues brought up in the trial persist, and I don't even think I can't remember it actually lasting that much longer after the trial ends. I think it does wrap out kind of quickly. I think it is just those three. All I can think of are those three kind of moments, or those three locations, right? So she's in the car, and then is at the restaurant, and then she eventually arrives home, and as the scene with the son wraps up the story with the son and
Well, there's another
the
scene before that. Just
the
there's a
court.
scene in the living room, and then there's a scene in the bedroom, and then the scene in the bedroom is about to end, and then it doesn't.
It's with the court
Yeah.
lady.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she has to wrap up with the court lady, and then the son, and then finally all by herself, and yeah. So I didn't have a problem with that. And yeah,
Well,
the idea that like one second, after the trial ends, the problems haven't stopped. So she still has to be worried about perception, how people think about her. She still has this kind of weird disconnect with her son, and that's not going to be done. He's forgiven her, but there's kind of like this like cold like it's reminding me a little bit of like a little movie called Sledgehammer Man, where like it's this mother son relationship where they don't really know how to like interact with each other.
Sure.
It's kind of like put on. It feels
Yeah.
forced almost. And so yeah, so I think all those scenes are justified personally.
I'm not saying they're not justified. I'm not saying that they don't serve a function. My critique is more of one of just editing and execution of them. I just think they're played as if they're all equally important, and I don't think that's true. Like I think that most individual moments are played as if they're equally important, and I don't think that's true either. I agree that all of those ideas are important. I just think that the movie would have, to me, just a stronger ending if they're a little more succinct about it. Just some they're more succinct for, some they drag out more, instead of it just being like it just kind of like moves. It's just a car that's slowly rolling at the end. It's not the end of the world. Didn't
Yeah.
ruin the movie for me by any chance, but I just think that it could have been executed a bit better.
I will say, like, I agree with you. I do think pacing wise, what you just said about a car slowly rolling to a stop, I did feel that way. I felt that is kind of how it felt to me. Just to kind of like bring us towards wrapping up, one thing we haven't talked about too much at all is this idea of like the mediums and how
Yeah.
we see information presented in different ways. Quite early on, I think it's a title sequence. It's like a series of photographs, and that comes up again
Yeah.
later. And I think that's the clearest symbolism of the point is trying to get at. But there's also videos, audio recording, different types of cameras. So there's like the court cameras. There's I think body cams from police officers. Lots of different ways of like showing these kind of objective truths. But I like that the photograph is so simple in that like it's a snapshot. It's literally a snapshot in time, and it does not paint a whole picture. You can only get so much information from a photograph.
Yeah.
And it may be emblematic of a larger idea, but it's not everything. And that's kind of what this court case is investigating is these bits of evidence that point towards larger things, but you can't really tell. In the photographs, for example, they look quite happy. It's photographs of a happy couple, and that may not always be the case, but it's only a snapshot. It can only do so much.
Yeah, I agree, and I like that it's showing again like we have this need to explain and understand, and these are just types of information. I want to, if we're wrapping up, I want to really quickly touch upon visual direction again. Just because I think it's very superb. I love the shot choice in this movie. I love that the courtroom never feels the same. I love that there's a real attention to levels, particularly like vertical levels. There are a lot of shots that are particularly we're looking up into the attic in the home. And we're looking. It's emphasizing the fact that it's an attic. It's emphasizing that there's verticality to the shot. It does that in the courtroom too, where it emphasizes that the judge is above them and that this whole thing is above them. And there's like we're usually looking up at them, or we're from their perspective looking down. And you might say like, oh well, that's inherent to the geography, but it's also shot choice, and it's portraying that in a specific way. I love how the courtroom itself is dissected through shots. There's a great when the son comes back in towards the end to give kind of his final thing in the court. We don't know if the mom is there. Like it does not show that the mom is there until a very particular moment, which we haven't seen that part of the room because the room is different. We don't have the audience that we typically have, and like there are clear differences. So it's like, is she here? Is she even hearing this? And I think that that's really interesting. There's another great moment when the son is talking earlier and the camera does this really brilliant thing where I think it's locked on him and it's kind of arcing around him depending on who is talking to him.
Yeah.
And not only does that show, not only again is it just like it's just very precise, like it realizes I don't need a cut here. In one shot I can just show what is happening, I can say it. It also puts us in his perspective while also seeing his reaction. So we get to see how he's reacting facially to what is happening. And also, because he is blind, we are put in his seat because he literally cannot see the people who are talking to him. Right. And so all we get is the direction and all we get is the sound. And so I think like that's a really brilliant camera move.
Yeah, no, I definitely noticed that one. That was really cool. I was just going to say like this idea of kind of it's sort of like spatial context and where people are. You mentioned like when he's giving his testimony, the kid, we don't know that she's there, and I think again that's kind of like tying back to those ideas like it doesn't matter if she's there. It's these people are deciding her fate, whether or not doesn't matter what she thinks about that. So I think that was clever editing, specifically choosing to like keep her hidden until that point. Yeah. That happens also with another character that I like. I think I said that too. Like I laughed in the theater when it starts off with this. I think this is a police officer, and he has some evidence to tell, and then there's like a 5-minute argument, and it cuts back to him, and he's still on the witness stand. I was like, he's still here.
Yeah,
he's still here.
Yeah,
that was so funny.
Yeah, and the way it isolates various characters in conversation, I think is great. There's another great moment I really like when I think it's also when the son is on trial. They were just, I guess that's either when I was really noticing it or when they were just popping off. When the prosecutor is asking him questions. Oh no, it might not be the son. I forget who's talking. Someone's at the stand. They're talking, and the prosecutor is asking them questions, and he's behind them, like where the audience is, and he's doing this in such a way that the person turns around to address him, but then the judge reminds them, no, you don't address it to the audience, you address it to me. And then you realize, oh, that's what the prosecutor's doing. Like, he's making it so that he has to talk to the audience. And I there's a lot of like just blocking and staging that emphasize the strategies that the prosecutor and the defender lawyer are employing. It's very, very well done.
The strategies, and again ties into the themes of like they're trying to like again use that idea of like public ideas, like what the public thinks of this character, and so using the audience against her. I'll say like cinematography, I agree with all those things you said. Lots of like zooms, which is fun.
Love zooms. Motivated
camera movement I love, and with actor blocking, which you don't see too often these days. Lots of like those like very, very dirty OTS. We should explain what dirty means. Dirty is not like grimy
there's dust on the frame.
Sexually. Like it just means if you've got the classic is the over the shoulder shot, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but dirtying the frame is when you are looking at one character and you see a part of the other character's body in the frame. So you're dirtying the frame in an over-the-shoulder shot with the shoulder, right? Yeah. But in this movie, they, like, there's, like, the shot they cut back to a couple times is behind the judge's head, and the judge is, like, pushing Sandra, like, totally into one corner of the screen, totally restricting her. And another one they use is cutting to an over-the-shoulder of I think it's Daniel, the son, and it's kind of like at moments where you're wondering what he thinks of her and the information she's saying, like, how does he feel about that? And so we cut to a shot of her, but we're with him, and we're thinking about what he's thinking about it. Oh, one other thing I'll just say quickly. There's a shot of, like, when they're driving down a winding road and it's night and there's headlights. Scared the shit out of me.
Yeah,
I was like, ah!
That I wrote in my notes, hardest shot that any movie can include, and that's just like, I mean, like, that's a shot you see all the time where it's like, it's just the headlights illuminating the highway as you drive, and I think I've never seen that in a movie and not gone, hell yeah. That's a great shot.
It's a cool shot, but also like the fact that it made, like, got, like, a reaction out of me is so cool. And again, I think it's like, I think what it's saying is kind of like, again, that, like, small snapshot of a wider picture that you can only see what the headlights are showing you. And then there's a turn suddenly and you can't see what's ahead of you more than 20 feet or whatever.
I also just felt like that was a moment of, like, putting us kind of in Sandra's perspective and how she's feeling there. Like it is just a normal thing that's being, like, you're driving home, but because the stakes are so high to what's happening around her, like, it's scary. Like, it feels like anything could get her at any point, like anything could go wrong. And so I really like that.
Yeah. I think I'm close to them. One of the last things I just want to say, I think this movie, another thing it does well is kind of bring doubt into the audience's mind. We never get to see the events as they actually occur. I think that is a very strong choice. I think a weaker movie would either at the beginning or at the end show us what really happened. And I just love that it's left up to audience interpretation the entire time. And I think there's moments where it's actively trying to make you think maybe she did do it. Like, I think at the beginning, I even thought, like, oh, she probably did do it. Like, it really does seem like it. Yeah. And then it brings you on her side, and then it tries to take you away from her side. Yeah. And at the end, I even feel like I spoke to someone else about this movie, and they said that even at the end, they were waiting for, like, the rug to be pulled out from under them. And I thought that was, I think this movie is reacting against tropes of a last minute reveal, or perhaps, like, I don't know if this is the right word for this genre, but, like, the femme fatale character, like, it's the woman. Of course they did it, right? It's kind of this idea we have associated with film, and I think it's so smart that this movie's reacting against that. And yeah, I think that's mostly what I was going to say about that.
I have one final thing. Another thing I forgot about visual direction. This is something the movie does multiple times that I really like. So there's, again, like we've been talking about, there's this idea that we understand the world through storytelling, through a tradition of storytelling, and this is not necessarily an objective process. It involves a lot of projection, or it involves a lot of perpetuating of certain narratives and recontextualizing others and assembling threads, and the fact that there is a level of construction to our reality, like both of the realities that that both the prosecutor and the defendant are offering are curated realities. We know this, like you said in the scene when the lawyer is saying, well, I don't believe that story, like, I don't even believe what you're saying, so they have to come up with a specific thing. And I think that the movie is very aware that it is engaging in the same thing as well, and it draws attention to the fact that it is a movie, and it is also something that is being constructed. And so there's a common visual thing where the camera is, like, either picked up, or like it's suddenly breaking, or like it doesn't know where it's going, like it doesn't realize what's happening. And so I think that thematically ties in the way I described, and it also just really punctuates certain moments well, where it's like, oh, what is happening, where it's like not even the camera knows what's happening at this point, like this shouldn't be happening. I forget, I had written down specific a couple
I
specific
remember.
moments where I did it, but
Yeah.
I cannot read my chicken scratches right at this moment.
The first time we saw it was when we see the dad's body. I think.
Yeah.
There's a weird kind of like it starts like zzz, like it does
Oh
like
yeah,
a little,
there's like a
judder.
digital zoom almost in it too. It's really
Yeah,
weird. Yeah.
It feels like a digital zoom and pan and sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like they're readjusting, and
Yeah.
I think that was kind of pointing at that. And there's another moment where I think what we noticed was a jump cut. Like I think it
Yeah.
took something
Yeah.
out, like maybe even a few frames. And
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is true. I think it's pointing at your favorite word, artifice.
Yeah.
See that what we were watching as a movie. I had that in my notes, and I think I accidentally deleted it. It occurred to me also, like, this movie is very similar to a movie I saw. Oh, is that might have been the beginning of this year? I can't remember, but a movie called Saint Omer. It's another French
Okay.
courtroom
Yeah.
movie, so the comparison is very, very easy.
Yeah.
But I think it also calls into questions like about the system at large. So in that one, I think it's as much about women and the role they're supposed to play. Specifically in that film, it's the trial is about a woman who killed her baby, and so like that's quite clearly like about that sort of thing, as well as racism. And those characters are black, and they're from, I think they're from Africa originally. I can't really remember. And so there's a bit of xenophobia as well, which is quite a big problem I hear in Europe. But another movie this made me think of is Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
While we were talking about it, I was like, oh, that's the same. That's what we were talking about last week too. This idea of like, I think it was something you had said, like love, and like, is that possible while also having like these feelings of like hate against another, and so I think the relationship between those the mother and the husband in this movie, Sandra and her husband, is similar at the very least.
I also thought this movie also reminded me of Oppenheimer in the discussion of like subjectivity. But yeah. There are a lot of movies. I think that's a mark of a good movie though, generally, when I feel like when it reminds me of other things, and it's a variety of things that it reminds me of. It feels like you're drawing from a large palette.
Yeah, but this movie's worse than Oppenheimer because when it was subjective and not subjective, it didn't change colors. It wasn't black and white, and they didn't name drop President Macron or whatever.
That's true.
I think I'm done. You're done?
I'm done too.
Okay.
We can move on.
We have a segment, Aidan.
We sure do. So we have a segment called, in case you haven't noticed, the podcast is called Predator versus Movies. We've done the movie part. Now it's time to get into the Predator. We asked the question, would this movie be better if the Predator from the movie Predator was in it?
It's funny how you present that the prospect. So you always say, so yeah, we have a segment called, and then you go backwards and you start it over again.
That's because I always realize that it's wrong. I always realize I've started this.
But it sounds like that's the full title. It sounds like the segment is called, so you may have noticed this is a podcast where you call it. So like, I think we should just change it. I think the name of the segment is, so you may have realized this is a podcast and and yeah. So no, this of course would be significantly worse if Predator showed up.
And I don't know. Don't even have an idea of where Predator could be.
Not a clue.
I don't know. Predator is President
Does he have a
Macron.
theme song? Play it on the piano.
Yeah.
That's another thing. There's no
They're
score
watching
in this
Predator.
movie.
Yeah.
There's no score in
and
this movie.
I love that.
I like that a lot. And then it plays score when the credits roll, and I was like, wow.
Yeah. Oh, and also as a quick side note, there was a movie that had a very bassy score happening beside us, particularly towards the end. And the first time it came in, I was like, there's no way that's part of this movie. Because it was kind of a moment that felt appropriate for it. But then I was like, oh, no, never mind. No.
Yeah. I don't know if it's all theaters, but I feel like that theater that we went to in particular, not the best.
No.
It's so close that I don't want to like go anywhere else, but always problems with like my theater is too quiet and I can hear the theater next to me, and sometimes it's too dim, I think. I don't know. Lots of issues. Anyways, we have another segment called Predators Picks.
Sure do.
What have we watched, listened to, read, etc. Aidan, what are your Predators picks for us this week?
So I watched two movies. Actually, both of these were last night. I realized that I've watched very few movies this week. But
Same.
one of them I watched finally was Friday the 13th. I
What was
watched
that?
that. That was the first one I watched. That movie sucks. That is a terrible
Aw.
movie. It's really bad. It's really bad, and it's also clearly a ripoff of Psycho and Halloween. Like, very obviously. Like, it's like the
Yeah.
Psycho. I didn't realize it was so Psycho. It does like the false first act thing where it kills off who you think the main character is gonna
Oh,
be,
really?
and then which isn't like Psycho didn't invent that, and you can do it. But then at the end, the reveal with the killer and the way the killer's talking, it's like okay, like
And there's
I don't
like a
know,
shower
I don't know.
scene.
Yes,
And
there's shower stuff.
really?
Yes, there is a. It's
Oh,
not
I was
quite.
joking. I haven't seen it.
It's yeah. I forget if they're killed in the shower or if they're right near it, but there is a shower scene. But I
The
don't know.
birds?
Do you know what the? Do you know who the killer is in the first one? Spoiler for Friday the 13th.
Jason starts with a V.
No.
Or maybe it's not.
So
Oh, that's
yeah.
interesting.
So that's
that-
that's
don't
why I
spoil it
was.
for me. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't want to spoil it. Yeah. Which
But
is
what
I
about
mean
Freddy
I
versus Jason?
that's
Freddy
that
versus
comes
Jason?
later. That
Oh, we
comes-
verse him
later.
if Jason not
But
there.
It's funny you bring up Freddy because the other movie I watched was
I saw that.
I've been continuing my watch through of a Nightmare on Elm Street series, and I watched a Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. This movie's really awesome. Like shockingly
Yay!
good. It's like, and I don't know, to be fair, it could just be that I watched a movie that was slop beforehand. And so I watched a comparatively good movie, and so I was like, oh hell yeah! But it's like immediately I was like, oh, a well directed. No, this movie's really really good. I like it way better than the first one, honestly. I don't like it. The second one is not as good. So my ranking so far is 3-1-2 of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I think that I nearly gave this movie 4.5 stars. But it just like I brought it down to 4
great.
because the third act is not as strong. But like this movie's awesome for a good chunk of it. It's not without its flaws, but this movie's really cool. So I do recommend this.
That's funny. I'm just looking on Letterboxd what, like the general consensus is. So, okay, there's the second one. I didn't know what the second one was. So, people do agree that the third one is. How much do they think the first one is? No, people like them pretty similar, but they do generally lean to the first one. But third is the next best one according to Letterboxd, and they're like it's 3.7 and then 3.5, so not too different. But I did also check. At some point, you were gonna have to watch Freddy versus Jason. Funny enough that I did mention that.
Yeah.
That is part of the universe.
That's part of the universe, yeah. I don't
when
think
was-
I will watch the other half of that, which is all the Friday the 13ths that I need. I will not
Yeah.
do that. I will just watch the Nightmare on Elm Street ones.
So it does go 3 for the Dream Child,
Yeah,
the
that's 4.
Final Nightmare,
Oh yeah, 5.
New
yeah.
Nightmare, which
Yeah.
is I think the next best
I'm
one.
I'm excited
and
for New
Freddy
Nightmare.
versus
That
Jason.
New Nightmare sounds good. I will
Interesting.
not watch the reboot though. The reboot
Okay.
looks dumb. The 2010 one.
I think that's
don't wanna watch that.
the most recent one. Well, I have seen one movie and I watched the Eras tour. Is it a movie? Not really. I mean, hey, they capture the experience of being at the concert. I've heard some people say doesn't even do that well, but I don't think I was really like
It was like,
noticing that.
yeah.
That's not why I was there. I was, but yeah, I think it's fine. It's like if you like Taylor Swift, it's like being at the Taylor Swift concert, but for less money. More money though than a regular movie ticket.
Really?
Each ticket.
Why?
And it cost $20.
What the fuck?
It's ridiculous. And
Why?
I think it's because she did not go to the studios to release the movie. She released it independently and
okay.
had a different contract with the theaters. And so I
Sure.
think she negotiated a higher price per ticket. And I was just like, guess I'm spending $20 per ticket on this. Fuck, fine. I did not buy the Eras popcorn bucket and drink.
The collectibles?
It came.
Oh.
Maybe I considered it. I considered buying them for Anatomy of a Fall, but I thought that would be in poor taste.
Yeah.
Anyways, next week, Oh, we got to do the one that
The
came out
Killer.
this week, sort of.
Yeah.
The Killer. We should watch
Yeah.
I should also go watch that today. But yeah, so David Fincher's The Killer will actually be out. It was out this week, but it was kind of like a weird situation. It comes out on Netflix on November 10th, but there is a short theatrical release so that it can qualify for awards, but not make you think that theaters are still viable, so that streaming can still conquer the world. But yeah, we'll do that anyways, probably. If you like us, check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Predator v Movies. On our YouTube, we've also started doing shorts. We like short shorts. That's the YouTube slogan for that program. Not our own thoughts on that or jeans.
Nice.
You know, like short jeans.
Good
Not
job.
enough of those. I mean, I like short shorts.
Yeah, sure.
Jeans as well. Anyways, I feel like I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point.
Brain melting.
If you like, this is what happens when I pod. If you like my thoughts on movies, check me out on Letterboxd at _AlexGordon_. I leave reviews sometimes, and I also. If you like Martin Scorsese's thoughts on movies, check it out on Letterboxd.
As
I don't
Letterboxd
remember his
is
username.
very keen to advertise because I literally
Yes.
got a notification from the app telling me that this was happening. But you can also check me out on Letterboxd. I'm 810sunny. That's 810SONNY. My name is Wombo. I also leave reviews sometimes.
Does Peter have anything? No, he doesn't. He's not here.
No, he doesn't. He's not
so
here.
That means you have to leave a review.
Do it. 5 stars.
Or
YouTube.
something else.
Podcasts. Podcast
Leave a
Zone.
comment.
Spotify. The podcast world. Wherever you listen to podcasts.
Juice World.
Juice World.
So I just looked up Scorsese's Letterboxd. He has 257,000. That's a lot. That's
a lot.
That's a little bit over 250,000.
Yeah.
So that's pretty impressive. His username. How do I know?
It's
What is your username?
Marty
sir?
_scores.
Oh, here we go. I got it. It's M Scorsese. Because there's a lot of people who claim they're Scorsese, but it's the one that has patron. He was a patron of the podcast. Or of the podcast.
Of the podcast, yeah.
He's our first patron. Follow us on Patreon, which we don't have. Just for It's just Martin Scorsese who is just paying us. He's just paying us.
Just
and
loves what we gotta say.
We just send him little messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you like us,
We just
also,
say thanks, Marty.
Yeah, thanks for saving cinema, Marty. He just wants that at the end of the day. You know, it's better than a cold beer.
Which is why starting now, every episode will end with us saying in unison, thanks, Marty.
Thanks, Marty. Except that's only a tease because that is only for the Patreon that he is paying for.
Exactly.
So you won't get to hear it.
Yeah,
but
and if you
Marty
want to hear
will.
that, then you can sign up for a Patreon now.
Patreon, but you have to be Martin Scorsese. Anyways, bye.
Bye.